Hi everybody, my name is Batul. Welcome to my first ever video. I've literally recorded this video like 5 times, so I swear this is gonna be the last time that I do it. So yeah, I am from Texas. I recently graduated college and now I work in the sales world. One of the things that I love, as you can tell from behind me, is reading. I am a huge reader. I think I read like 30 books a year. So I wanted to dedicate my first video to the love of reading. And again, I can make another video about how I really got into the fiction genre and what kind of books I like and what authors I like. So let me know if you want me to make one of those videos. The first book that I want to talk about is 9 Perfect Strangers by Liane Moriarty. Liane Moriarty is probably one of the authors that I've read the most. I've read 4 of her books, starting with her most famous one, Big Little Lies. Now, Big Little Lies, as you may know, was recently adapted into a TV series starring Reese Witherspoon, Nicole Kidman, Zoe Kravitz, and Meryl Streep was in the 2nd season of the show. Moriarty is an Australian author. She is known for writing thriller, women-focused stories, and 9 Perfect Strangers happens to be one of those stories. The book is about 9 perfect strangers who arrive at an Australian health resort in the country to deal with their own personal and interpersonal issues. The characters in the book are Frances. She is an aging romantic author whose recent book didn't do so well. Then you have somebody by the name of Ben and Jessica. They're a couple who acquired a lot of money in very little time, and they're having some marriage issues as well as issues with Jessica's addiction to social media. Then you have Lars, who is a very handsomely described gay man whose partner wants to have a kid, but he himself is not sure about fatherhood. You have Tony, who was a retired Australian football player whose wife recently left him. He is overweight and he has a very distant relationship with his kids. You have Carmel in the same vein, who is a divorced, middle-aged mother. She has some body image issues. She feels very overwhelmed with the task of being a single mother, and added to the trauma is the fact that her husband also recently got married, or her ex-husband, I guess. And then you have, I believe, somebody by the name of Napoleon, his wife Heather, and his daughter Zoe. All 3 of them arrive around the 1-year anniversary of when their son, who happens to be Zoe's twin, killed himself on their birthday. The resort is run by Masha, who is an Eastern European immigrant to Australia, and one of her subordinates, Yao, who secretly happens to be in love with her. Yeah, all of these characters arrive at this resort, and just like a classic Moriarty book, there's a hint that there is a big mystery that is about to unravel later on in the book. What it is, you have to read through to find out. So yeah, in summary, all of these characters at a resort, they are slowly addressing and reflecting on their personal issues when 5-6 days into their trip, they're given a smoothie that happens to be laced with LSD. What happens next is that they all find themselves locked in a basement, and Masha forces these people to try to get out by using their cooperative skills as well as trying to address the reasons why they came into this resort. So that is the big mystery that unfolds, and really towards the end, the character of Masha is almost very threatening and villainous, and you actually wonder if she's going to kill these people or if they're going to make it out alive. Really, I think the chunk of the book is not spent so much on the psychedelic experience itself or the mystery, so-called, of the book, but more on the characters and their backstories and what drove them here. There are some great things about this book that really makes Moriarty's writing stand out. I think one of my biggest compliments of Liane Moriarty is characterization and character development. I think oftentimes people who write in the thriller or mystery genre focus too much on plot points. They focus too much on cliffhangers. They focus too much on climaxes, whereas Moriarty focuses more on characters. I think having strong characters is central to the story, and then the plot itself, I believe, should be secondary. I mean, if you think about it, there could be a person with a great story to tell, but if they're off-putting as a human being, you're not really going to stay around and see what they have to say. I think reading about each of the characters, you really wouldn't be able to guess that there was one single woman behind writing these diverse life experiences. On one hand, you have somebody like Frances, who is 55 years old. She writes cheesy romantic novels that she was recently is scammed by a love interest in America. And then on the other hand, you have somebody like Jessica, who has a lot of plastic surgeries. She is a social media queen, and she is dealing with heavy insecurities, not only in regards to how she looks, but also her relationship with her husband Ben, who is more obsessed with his sports car than taking care of his wife. So I really do love the fact that Moriarty spends a lot of time building her characters. Among all the characters that I really like, I think the stories of Napoleon, his wife Heather, and his daughter Zoe really was the one that tugged at my heartstrings because it dealt with the issue of suicide. I think that is such a triggering topic, and I think a lot of authors really fall wayward when it comes to treating issues like suicide, or in the case of Carmel, body image issues or eating disorders. I think a lot of authors try to use these plot points as being exploitative or scandalous, whereas Liane Moriarty treats them with a lot more of a gentler hand. Now, for example, we take something as taboo as suicide. I think oftentimes other authors can treat it as a scandal in the book or can be very exploitative about emotional and mental problems. Liane Moriarty, on the other hand, treats suicide with a very, very sensitive and considerate touch. In fact, I think there's one point in the book that I absolutely love was when Napoleon is trying to talk to his dead son, and he says, "Kiddo, this time you cannot take it back." And that's just hauntingly beautiful. You have this character who's a father talking to his dead son, calling him kiddo, and trying to tell him what a big mistake he did, in the same way as if he just like spilled milk on the table counter. So I think that's really gorgeous. On the other hand, there is another very poetic scene when Ben and Jessica are clinging on to each other under a psychedelic experience, and they're crying, and you finally think, oh my god, this couple might end up together. But what is really happening is this couple is embracing each other, knowing that they're going to do it for one last time. I think Masha in the book, who is portrayed more of a villain, is also giving a backstory that really makes us understand where she's coming from. She goes through a huge trauma earlier on when she comes to Australia, when her son passes away, then she gets pregnant again, leaves both her child and her husband just to focus on a corporate career, so she doesn't have to deal with the guilt of the tragedy of what happened to her child. So in all of these ways, I think Liane Moriarty really focuses on creating empathetic characters whose action you don't necessarily have to agree with, but you can understand where they're coming from, and you're hoping and wishing for them to do better. And then obviously at the height of the book, when they are all undergo their psychedelic experiences, the way that Liane talks about it and writes about it is really heart palpitating and makes you want to turn over to the next page. However, I think that Liane Moriarty can really benefit from eliminating some of the characters. Instead of 9 Perfect Strangers, maybe name the book 8 or 7 Perfect Strangers. I think the characters of Tony, who was the retired Australian football player, or Lars, who was the gay man whose partner wanted a son or a daughter, weren't really necessary in the book. You really don't really get to know much about them. I think Tony was mainly there to drive Frances' story because there was a hint of romantic connection between the two, and Lars was just there for the sake of being there. I think when you have a book that puts so much emphasis on the backstories of some characters, that often runs the risk of making other characters seem half-baked and not really focus so much on what brought them there. I do have some criticisms, not specifically for the book itself, but more for Liane Moriarty. I think her writing could almost be very formulaic. I think she's too great of a writer to keep repeating the same stories but with different characters. Just like in Big Little Lies and The Last Anniversary and A Husband's Secret, the book starts out with mostly female characters who are dealing with day-to-day issues. It hints at a big mystery. The mystery is revealed 3/4 way around the book, and it happens to be extremely taboo and extremely scandalous, and then everything just ends up on a happier note, which is fine, but I feel like for the next Moriarty book, it will be very expected to, have the same blueprint, but just with different characters. overall, if I was to summarize Nine Perfect Stranger, I would summarize it as a really strong story with a strong emphasis on some central characters, driven by a plot that does start out slow but really reaches its momentum at its peak 3/4 way around the book. So overall, I would give the book a strong 7 out of a 10. I think it was a good return to Liane's book after reading something as great as Big Little Lies. So yeah, I do think this is a classic Liane Moriarty book. You should definitely read it. I would rate it more among her top books rather than her bottom books. And yeah, that's my discussion slash review of the book. This took a lot of tries, so thank you for sticking around and watching it. And I promise I'll get better. If you want me to review any other movie or TV show or anything happening in the cultural or political world, please drop a comment below. But thank you so much for coming and have a nice one.